always skips a number for me. I'm going to be perfectly honest.
Okay, well, at least it's uniform and it's just not arbitrarily like, okay, now we're at 1, so.
I mean, I feel like it skips. It skipped 3 a couple times. I know, but I remember I've seen it skip numbers a good bit. So, welcome, hi everyone. This is the PoliSciFi podcast, which is short for political science fiction. The political science fiction podcast, where we take real politics. You examine real politics using stuff from worlds of fiction as a basis for it, and sometimes the other way around. Yeah, this is our show. We're trying this.
Weird when we run a whole other different show, because I'm so used to being like, oh, okay, this is formulaic at this point. Like, this is what we do. I guess my name's Cody. I should probably start with that instead of just like being a disambiguous voice on the other end of you're speaking here. So
yeah, I'm Kyle. The first episode of any new project is always the weirdest because you have no idea what you're going to talk about, what your intro is going to be. Like, even if you write something down, you're like, is this good? And the second it pops out of your mouth, you just want to sort of restart it again. But I mean, I think our motto here is, we're not here to explain why it makes sense, why it works, just what happened.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. No, because politics is one of those things, like political science. It's one of those things where, like, you're explaining. You spend a lot of time in political science explaining why things are done, but you're almost never going to have too many like case studies of whatever to say, like, oh yeah, this works. Like, I can explain what happened. Like, I can explain why this structure exists as it does. I can't tell you it works.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
And I guess when we're looking at things through not only like a political science lens, we're also looking at things through like a film lens. We're only left to fully grasp at straws by the end of everything, because I mean, sure, like in movies, a lot of political systems crumble, but like a lot of political systems also work and have worked in their respective universes for I don't even know how long, considering it's I want to say, like, we say political sci-fi, but honestly I think that's mostly because the name's kind of a little bit more catchy, because there's a lot of other like movie genres that I don't want to like put ourselves into the box of like, oh, we're only going to do like Star Trek or Andromeda or like Stargate or Andromeda is its own TV series.
Yeah,
pretty sure
I've seen it. I don't know what it's about.
Andromeda?
Yeah, Andromeda.
Yeah, that's completely fair. Either do I.
I mean,
my
dad had the Space Channel on a lot as a kid, so I've definitely seen the show. I just don't know what it's about.
Mm-hmm. It's like Battlestar Galactica. I can never get into. Like, I think I watched like the first like 10 minutes of the first episode of Battlestar Galactica and never stuck for me.
There's a lot of stuff about Battlestar Galactica that sounds really cool, but I've just never. I'm not gonna watch the whole thing. I'm good. I think I catch the drift of it. I kind of want. I wish it was movies. Honestly.
Oh yeah, I think there's definitely something daunting about how deep you want to get into like a TV series, especially something that's kind of over at this point in time and has been over for like the last like 20 years. It's really hard for me to just shit talk people who are advocating for shows like Firefly and like I guess the movie Serenity that came off like the year almost 20 years ago, but there's still adamant fans out there that are like, we need to vamp these couple of TV shows that I really like that ended on cliffhangers. I kind of feel for him because the other day, speaking of TV shows with like really cool implications into like the fantasy world and the genre in itself, and like heavy political science backgrounds, I watched the 2000, I do believe, 8 Dresden Files by Jim Butcher.
Oh, the TV show?
It was turned into a TV show in 2007, as close. And it had one season consisting of 12 episodes. And it was apparently executive produced by Nicolas Cage. Okay, that's weird.
I can see it.
I didn't realize that while I was watching it, but yeah. Really liked it, really enjoyed it. They had this whole like shadow under government of like mages or something. Like it had really cool implications into like the whole fantasy world, but like just I didn't see as much of it on screen or like.
Oh, have you read the books?
No.
Oh, the books are good.
At
least the ones I've read. I've only read like 8 of them.
That's like 8 more books than I've read in like the last 5 years. So
I feel like maybe that's like I don't know how many of them there are. I don't know. I think there's like 15. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure there's more than that.
Okay, yeah. They're pretty good.
Because it's still ongoing. It started in 2000 and it's been still going up until present day. So it is
that
17
and The Legend
books.
of Drizzt were my big high school novel things I read.
Yeah, you've got like 11 or 12 books to catch up on at this point in time. So
I don't know. Eventually, maybe. I'm not that interested after a certain point.
I love the fact that they don't put out anything about this. Okay. Sorry, I'm just looking at the Wikipedia page, and I was like, I wonder how big these books are, because I'm assuming they're anywhere between 200 to 300 pages long. And am I looking in the
inch and a quarter thick? I usually find, or 2 inches thick.
Yeah, but that's not a good measurement of how many pages a book is by saying it's 2 inches thick. Like, but I mean, with that being said, the Wikipedia page only has the audio length, so it doesn't tell you the page amount. It just tells you audio length, and I mean, it's anywhere between 8 and 15 hours long. So,
I mean, I have 5 of them across the room. I'm not going to go get them, but
yeah,
I do have 5 of them down the hall. Whatever. We haven't talked about what we're talking about. Yeah, this is we're going to start this about let's start with a Star Wars episode. Pretty standard. We're going to touch back on some Star Wars stuff later, but this is I think there's a lot of talk about why the Republic and Star Wars failed, and I have a little bit of a slightly different take, a slightly different idea. Because I'm doing this episode on the Senate of Star Wars, particularly the Senate we see in the first episode, the Senate of the Galactic Republic, eventually the Galactic Empire. Yeah, I have some thoughts about it, and I was mulling it over, and like I was originally going to do like a thing where like, oh yeah, we talk about all the stuff that's like describe what we can learn from the Republic and whatnot, and I just had a thought. I was like mulling over what was about this about the Old Republic Senate, and I thought I don't really have much to say about them. At least not anything interesting. And then I realized something. I realized something sort of important to the subject is that I'm a Senate abolitionist. like in real life, I think that I live in Canada, so that's not as controversial as some of the American listeners maybe think it is. Yeah, so yeah, I realized like, oh yeah, someone who holds that political position probably has some thoughts about this. I should say some of those.
I think there's definitely a point of like, when are we giving too much power over to the Senate? Once again, I don't think we have a Senate in Canada. You think
No,
if
we absolutely
we were
do.
like, okay, but we have a House of Commerce, right?
Yeah, but we also have a Senate. We'll get to this actually.
No, we have a legislature. we
yeah,
we have legislation.
Yeah, there is
a
Senate.
Have a Senate. The U.S.
We have a
actually
Senate.
no. The U.S. has a. Okay, do we
No.
actually call it a Senate though?
Yes. The upper house, our
Since
upper
when?
house is a Senate. 1867.
Oh wow. Okay. Oh.
Yeah, whole time.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. Okay. Yeah, we'll get to this a bit more.
Parliament.
Well, we have both. I mean, it's part of Parliament, depending on how we describe this. Yeah.
So Kyle has a history degree. I have some school, like higher education. We were just talking about this, and we were talking about this because I work as an educational assistant nowadays. We were talking about this in like my grade 6 class with a couple of kids I was working with. But yeah, besides that, it's been like, I don't know, 15 to 16 years before I've taken a look at how our political system works. So yeah, this might be dicey for a couple of episodes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this isn't like an entire thing about the Canadian Senate, but I did write one of my, when I did my political science class in Canadian political science class at university, I did write my final paper on why we should get rid of the Senate. So yeah, I had some thoughts. So, but we'll get over to this a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna start with so what is a Senate? I think is the basic thing where we need to start here. So the Senate comes from, like, the original Senate was from ancient Rome, which is where we get the word. The Latin term was senatus, which is from the root word senex, meaning like elder or old man. So that's where the word comes from. So the Roman Senate was the ruling, like sort of a ruling body of the Roman Republic, and I guess sort of the empire. But that doesn't really work the way a modern political system would be recognizable. It's just where we get the term. They aren't elected, and it's not like an elected body. You get in it by like being a prominent. I think if you're a magistrate, which is another thing. I don't have time to explain what it is. You get like put in automatically. It's an appointed body, and essentially it's like a council of elders is vaguely what it is, and that's like super oversimplifying it because we're not like doing a whole episode on the Roman Senate. And also, this is a thing about the Star Wars Senate, which is not comparable to the Roman Senate. Yeah, the Roman Senate works not how a modern government works. Yeah, very different animal, but it is where we get the term and where we get some intellectual inspiration for when we get the real Senate. And the sort of Senate we're talking about today sees its origins more in a little bit more 1776, as far as I can tell, from our good old buddies down south, the United States of America, when they create their Senate. I'm fairly certain they're the ones who invent it as we understand it today. There's some other government bodies that are occasionally called Senate elsewhere, but they're not really comparable to this, important to this conversation. Sometimes a Senate is like a group of like judges in some places, which makes it more like the supreme. Some places their Supreme Court or whatever is part of what is called like a Senate, essentially, or like the part of the government that's the Supreme Court is called the Senate. But that's not what we're talking about today. But I think the one we're looking for, I'm fairly certain it was originated in the United States. I'm not finding any earlier examples of what we're sort of describing here, other than in the United States. So, yeah, they create the United States Senate, which is a body which which is a part of a bicameral parliamentary system, where where you take a bunch of people and each of them are representatives of a certain portion of the country you are in. The United States Senate is apportioned. You get 2 senators for each state, which is sort of which is sort of where we're getting a idea that's comparable to what we see in in Star Wars. In real life, this is a thing to balance out the House of Representatives, which is made up of representatives of the United States Republic, each of which is like more or less equal portions of population, and every however many numbers of people you get a representative, and that is to be balanced with 2 senators for the number of states. So there can be as many representatives in Congress as they feel they need, and they have 2 senators per each state to sort of balance it out, and to sort of balance the will of the masses, which is made in the House of Representatives, and balance that out with a pair of guys for each state. Now, that's all very complicated, but yeah, so this is the big difference between most real senates and the Star Wars Senate, is that the Star Wars Senate doesn't have a House of Representatives. It's not an upper house. It is just the singular house of the Republican government, of the Galactic Republic's government. Yeah, so that causes some issues. Yeah, because as you were noticed, like the Senate in our world, most of the Senates in our world are defined by their ability to temper the masses and to like bring a balance between a house which is dictated, which its membership is dictated more or less by the population of a country, whereas a Senate, as described in this fashion, is representing so many people for each component of the government, which leads us to some interesting things. How am I doing so far? Is that making sense?
Yeah, I think so for the most part.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I mentioned it like 10 minutes ago or whatever that I'm a semi-abolitionist in Canada. Now, mostly this is a lot more because the Canadian Senate doesn't work very well. I think so the Canadian Senate is different from the American Senate. The American Senate is elected, like there are elections for each senator. The Canadian Senate is not. Yeah, the Canadian Senate, each senator is appointed by the Prime Minister, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. Maybe the Governor General. I'm forgetting off the top of my head. Either way, same problem. I think it's mostly survived because I don't think it's really ever caused too much of a stink, But I mean, still, I think at least like two of our big prominent political parties are really not a big fan of the Senate, mostly because, yeah, it's appointed. The senators are appointed for life by whoever happens to be the prime minister at that time. So yeah, it's kind of bad. Also, the Canadian Senate is weighted completely different from how the American Senate is. Canadian provinces don't all have the same number of senators. Canadian Senate distribution is decided by regions in Canada. Those regions being Ontario, Quebec, Maritimes, the West, which that doesn't work out too well. It's yeah. So that means that like Quebec and Ontario get like 48 of them, or Ontario on its own gets 24 senators, and like say Saskatchewan or British Columbia get like 8 or 6. I think it's actually 6.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's super weird. Yeah, the thought behind the Senate. So the thought behind the Senate in our reality is that the Senate is a tempering force, a home of, as they'll often put it, sober second thought, which is my big problem with it, is that they say sober second thought, but really they mean it is a way to temper us unruly commoners who need tempering because we can't be trusted to run our own damn lives. This is really demonstrated by in the UK, where they have a House of Commons, which is if you're American, it's sort of the equivalent body to your your Congress, your House of Representatives. Where they in UK they don't have a Senate, they have a House of Lords, where they just have some.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, they have an entire house which is like dictated, which is run by barons and knights and shit like that. It's an abomination to democracy, and anyone who you should just like shoo off anyone who ever steps foot in there. I think it's just one of the worst things I've ever seen.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, elected senates are actually like a fairly new thing. The American Senate was also an appointed body until like 1914. Yeah, that was they originally were appointed. I forget by who, but that was a change made with the 17th Amendment in 1913, and that ended up taking effect in 1914 because that's when the next elections were. So, yeah, and for whatever reason, Canada never followed suit. Yeah, and there's reasons for that. I don't think there's much they could have. I don't think Canada has the same mechanisms to do that. At least I don't think they have the same mechanisms to do that until like the 70s, maybe, or the 60s. Yeah, because I don't know. I'm a little rusty on that, but I think we don't really get too many constitutional issues. I don't think. Yeah, no, we don't get a real a constitution in the same way the Americans have until like the 60s, because Trudeau puts it into place. Pierre Elliott, not Justin. Justin's dad.
Unless you prescribe to the notion that like most alt-righters do, that Trudeau is not Justin Trudeau's father, and that's Fidel Castro.
God damn it.
Sorry, I gotta go at least off on like one tire about the alt-right while I'm on a political science podcast, right? So
I suppose
absolutely insane.
But that's the main thing that clarifies the Senate in our world, is that it's meant as a tempering force, which is what they view the upper house is. It's just that what the upper house was adapted to something different when it was brought into the colonies. I think there's also some I think you could also bring up a really interesting idea of like there used to be there are actually I was about to say there used to be, but for the most part there are still like state senates in the states. Like each state has its own senate, and these had to be changed because it's kind of so yeah they were changed in the 1960s so that they had to be changed to also be proportional to population. Because here's the main problem I have with the Senate in our reality is that the Senate is, when you really get down to it, say you have an elected Senate, say tomorrow, like say with Canada, you change it so that we have an elected Senate like the States. That happens tomorrow. We have the big constitutional convention. Everyone approves it, and suddenly senators are elected now. Senates is sort of, at that point, the Senate functions a lot like the House of Commons, but the dividing lines between it are made, cannot be changed. Like, they are set in stone by as of like when the provinces were drawn up, the last of them be the last update to them being in 1949, and really just based on like, okay, you have let's say 4 senators in each province based on when these different places come in, and you suddenly have, well, I think this would be actually to our advantage to a point of view, but Saskatchewan suddenly has the same amount of political power as Ontario, which, I mean, like, we're from Saskatchewan, so people like to complain about, like, say that we don't have enough political power, but it can be a concern. Now, I don't think it would be as big a problem as it is in the States, but you would just have a bunch of new parliament seats, which are given political power totally apart from any modern concerns. Like, it's just, okay, the people in these lines drawn in 1905 have this amount of political power, and that doesn't necessarily make sense. And that's why in the 60s in the States they had to change the state senate to be proportional, is because we've taken the already arbitrary line of, let's say, Montana. Like, you got the arbitrary line of Montana, the arbitrary lines of where the borders of Montana are, and you can just create the Senate seats. So let's say you divide into 4, but one you have the top right quadrant where most of the people live, and the top left quadrant has like no people in it. So suddenly, you can just say, okay, this, as long as we have most of the people in one pit, or other way around, you have a lot of political power put in the other 3 random quadrants, and the one bigger quadrant can just be shut out. Even though, like, the House of Commons has been dominated by the people in that top right quadrant, suddenly in the second house you have power distributed basically randomly. And I'll give you a hint about something. That change to the state level senates was made in the 1960s during the civil rights era. So guess how they were abusing that? Just yeah, essentially giving vaguely unpopulated places where it's mostly white people, and having them overrule the concerns of like heavily populated areas that have more people of color and such. But yeah, so I've brought up these problems, and now let's look over back to Star Wars, where we've brought up these problems about how senates are made up of like, can be made up of like arbitrary boundaries, and their representatives can be created like as a construct of political power rather than like where people actually live. Now let's go to Star Wars, where they don't have a House of Representatives. There's no like you can have 1 billion people, and there's no like those 1 billion people don't get any more political power necessarily than a Senate, than a single space sector. So like that's a serious question we have. Does Coruscant have multiple senators, for example, in Star Wars? Coruscant being a home of 10 million people, like however billion people.
Yeah.
And just to double check, I always forget something. Yeah, so Coruscant does have a ton of have more than one senators, but just bringing this up again. So yeah, there's that issue of like, how many senators does Coruscant have? Because if Coruscant's like the most heavily populated area in the world in the Star Wars universe, is it properly represented in the House of Commons, which is or in the Senate, which is a big possible problem. But more than that, you can also have the reverse of a problem. Do you happen to have areas that have like very sparse populations just have like one senator? Yeah, because you can also have that problem, and that place gets a lot, and that could lead to a lot of more political power of these smaller areas. There are times as far as I can find, where like there are periods where the entire outer rim is just represented by one senator, which can be a problem getting what you need for people.
I'm sorry, I'm just I'm trying to figure out where in the whole entire Star Wars do we have like actual like any form of context for this.
Yeah, no, it's
because
these are open questions.
The amount of like Senate movies that we've seen within the Star Wars universe is very sparse, and I mean we see a lot of like political changes throughout the Star Wars movie, with the first 3 being heavily into like a democracy, into a dictatorship, and then forming later on into a dictatorship, into another dictatorship, into I also stopped watching the Star Wars movies after the new film, the first new film. So my Star Wars is a little backed up, and so is my political understanding. So to put this a little bit more into context, prior to Chancellor Palpatine rise to Emperor Palpatine, he was a senator, right?
Yeah.
And then like Queen Amidala was definitely a senator.
Yeah.
And there is no lower house. So who are they appealing to?
Okay, yeah, as far as I'm finding, like Coruscant just has one senator. Cause that's
okay.
Yeah, that would be a big problem. Cause that's
but we've also
could be
definitely seen like I guess another question we have to bring into the connotation here is how many factions within a Senate get power?
For the number I found for the number of senators in the Galactic Republic is about 2,000, which isn't unreasonable.
But so when we were looking at Naboo in the first film, the Queen Amidala gets a position within the Senate Council, and then later on, I do believe Jar Jar also gets a.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a weird thing about this.
So is that 2 different factions getting representation within the Senate itself, or is that just like, well, Coruscant's one unified government, so Coruscant only needs one representative for a faction speaking for him?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm getting at with this. So like Naboo actually, this is one we know a little bit more about, just because we got a good glimpse of how their politics works. So the senator for Naboo actually represents like the Naboo, the people, like who live on the planet, the human settlers who live on the planet Naboo. That senator also represents the Gungans, who live on the planet Naboo. And as we scroll out a little bit more, they also support like this larger space sector, which includes like at least one other major planet and a bunch of other random settlements in that vague area.
Okay.
But yeah, that can lead to a lot of problems. And like, I mean, there's going to be a lot of things like, okay, should Coruscant have like total, like if Coruscant is, let's say 20% of the population of the entire Republic, does that mean that like Coruscant becomes like this big kingmaker in Republic politics? And the answer is yeah, it would. But as it is now, like Coruscant seems like a pretty shitty place. Like, I don't think they're getting particularly well served by the system as it is, and I think that could probably be
probably a lot of planets in a lot of the sectors that are being very underrepresented in the Star Wars universe.
Oh yeah, easily.
Because when we take a look at like Tatooine within the first film, you know, it's currently mostly run on trade and barter. And pod racing and crime, like,
well, yeah, Tatooine's not in the Republic though, so that's
okay. So there's no representatives there.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a whole nother bag of beans. But
okay, fair enough. Yeah, like a lot of this is going to be me just realizing facts in real time because unlike Kyle, I haven't actually like done any research into the like political science background of Star Wars because I value my free time.
Yeah, I mean, that's a obvious problem we've seen. But so I think the Coruscant thing is actually a really big deal because like. Yeah, you got one guy essentially lying around trying to be like, hey, like it's kind of crappy here and we need like to redirect some funding into the slums in order to like make it so that people can breathe properly, and you're getting drowned out by like a literally 1,000 like almost 2,000 other guys with their own problems and being given equal weight. But like, and then there's also like, go ahead.
You said 2,000 in total, correct? Right?
I don't know that that's the exact total. It's about 2,000.
Okay, is that the okay?
Yeah.
There's too many questions. Like, what if? So, like, what if? Yeah, 2,000 senators, 2,000 Senate planets, 2,000 like Senate
senators.
Seats.
Well, yeah, senators, Senate enough. Seats. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you get into the Republic?
They let you in. Like, you presumably you're either a colony established by the Republic, which is how a lot of the outer rim places get in. Or you're a like existing civilization and you would presumably petition your way in.
So there's no like Republicans just like traveling out to like claiming I'm gonna say unmanned, but it's heavily implied that there's quotation marks in there, like unmanned planets, and just being like you're part of the Republican now. Much like colonization of half of
we do see examples of that in the series
right now.
Yeah, that does happen a handful of times. It's not happening every time, but it does happen. I think there's a Clone Wars episode where like they find there's a moon with some aliens on it that like these other guys own, and they essentially request dominion over it. which doesn't end up succeed. And frankly, I think that's kind of how the Gungans work. Like the Gungans don't have their own senator, and they're getting like they're having their needs like parroted through the Naboo senator. So that's a whole other thing too. Like, at
So it
what
wasn't
point
up until
would the Gungans get their own senator?
So it's up until the point that somebody reaches out to the Senate and is like, no, we want Nabooian, like, which in hindsight, like, there's like colonial connotations to be made here. There's indigenous connotations to be made here. Like, just like, why can't the indigenous people, determine their own rights and freedoms without having to go through political and government and bureaucracy and red tape, all that stuff. But
there's a lot of questions to be asked, really. And I suppose, like, say the Gungans were unhappy with the position. I think at the end of episode, like the end of Phantom Menace, I think there's a bit of a like agreement there. Like they seemed like the Gungans and the Naboo seemed to be getting along at the end of that movie. But like, say at some point in the future, like the Gungans want to cause a stink about it. Like they'd presumably have to like cause a stink about it. They'd have to like go to the Republic and like go to the Senate and be like, hey, this, and we want our own senator. And presumably there'd have to be a vote or something, or like they'd have to consult the Supreme Court or something.
Is there a Supreme Court? Am I missing something here? Because every time I've seen
I think they've mentioned the Supreme Court in Star Wars at some point, but
okay,
or whatever their equivalent of the Supreme Court is. There's going to be some guy that
High Council,
or something. There's going to be some people that if there's a legal issue, they're going to consult the like constitutional document they have and be like, oh, does this work, or does this how does this conflict with what's it? So that's a thing. But there's one. We'll bring up one.
Once again,
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
If you had
I was gonna say, once again, the only thing I'm going off of is like the maybe 12 minutes that you get through the Phantom Menace, the Clone Wars, and the Revenge of the Sith, like Senate scenes. So that is my complete understanding of the whole entire political system as seen within Star Wars. I don't know where you're pulling your information.
Mostly Wikipedia, and like I'm sort of like inferring what would be the case just to basically how stuff works. And I'm inferring that like there's some inspiration. You could be wrong. Yeah, there's some points where I could be wrong here.
I like to think that all decisions are just decided by a giant spin wheel in the Star Wars universe. Like, just like, oh, does Naboo get a senator today or not? And they just spin a wheel, and it's like, yes or no.
You could like, there could be a book tomorrow that says like, okay, Coruscant has 100 senators. Like, that could be a thing that's put out tomorrow. And I think I would still, some of this would still make sense. Like, I think it'd be very hard. Like, who's to say what the actual proper, how Coruscant should be weighted in the Imperial Senate. But yeah, this could be an issue. But moving on to like a last big problem here, like, as we may have noticed in Star Wars, there's a few senators which are stick out a little bit weird. Okay, like most of them are like, okay, you have a senator for Naboo, you have a senator for Ryloth, or whatever, and like, okay, these are senators representing this planet or the space territory these planets inhabit. There's also a few weird ones, like the Trade Federation and the Banking Clan and the Techno Union, which also have senators, which is weird because those are companies, not planets. Some of them may very well have like spawned from planets, but I have the whole. It'd be weird. Like, it'd be weird to say that. Like, I don't think these things are bound to planets. So, corporate nationhood is a thing in Star Wars. which is yeah, there's a million ways that could be going wrong.
Well, I mean, arguably, like, isn't that just basically lobbyists?
No, because it's
Like,
worse.
if we
Because
wanted, like, yeah, I know they're actually getting their way when they're just like actual senators within the universe, and we've kind of put a stop to lobbying for the most part. No, we have not. I don't know why I said that. I don't even know why I even thought about that.
I know
we've definitely made lobbyists more paired within senates, at least in the United States.
Yeah. So here's so a couple of the issues here with this are how many people are part of this company?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's just a big one. This is like okay, so
fair
lobbyists are bad. Lobbyists are bad, but I think they could do a lot more damage if like one of the lobbyists was actually a senator and could like filibuster. Like imagine if like if like every time there was like a military bill that someone didn't like, Lockheed Martin could fucking filibuster. Like how much worse would that be? Like that's a nightmare.
Fully understand the reference you're trying to make. I don't know who Lockheed Martin is.
Lockheed Martin is like a military aircraft company.
Filibuster
is when
I know what a filibuster is. I like
Okay, for the audience, a filibuster is when
explain it.
Is when like a member of I guess the Senate or House of Representatives or whatever government body walks up to the speaking stand and just speaks for as long as they feel they need to, or as long as they physically are able. And you do this to cause some problems. You're not allowed to do it in a lot of places, but you can do it in the United States. And I don't know if that's a big problem in Star Wars universes. I don't think it is. You never see anyone doing it. But yeah, if you had corporate representation in the United States Senate, it would absolutely be a nightmare situation.
So,
but
I was curious. So the longest filibuster in the United States was done by somebody named Strom Thurmond. And he filibustered for 24 hours and 18 minutes against the Civil Rights Act of 1957. Like how
this is why it's
like trash of a human being can you be to just be like, I'm gonna talk for 24 hours on why the Civil Rights Act is not a good idea? Like,
historic people make like big speeches about the filibuster, but historically it's been used for that. Largely it's been used for that sort of thing. But a couple things with corporate representation.
Another thing
go ahead
that you brought up earlier for terminology, the person who is drawing political maps, it's called gerrymandering when you're like using it to exclude certain certain territories and for your own political gain, I guess. So if we ever say gerrymandering without any connotation, that's probably what we're really
that's kind of a misstep on my part, because a really simple version of what I was trying to say earlier was like the Senate in the I just consider the Senate one big form of legalized gerrymandering, like more than gerrymandering is already illegal, but I just consider it like institutionalized gerrymandering, in my opinion.
And then there's I guess another like real world connotation that we're bringing up in the United States. Certain parts of the United States are not given statehood. So Washington D.C. I'm assuming they're all getting taxed still at that point in time. Am I saying that right? Washington isn't a state.
Yep. Washington is part of the is a District of Columbia, is what it's called.
What is the other one?
Well, there's other
Hawaii.
Hawaii's a state. Okay, so there's like
Okay.
The non-state entities in the United States are Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, which isn't a state because the Founding Fathers figured the capital city shouldn't be held by any state, so it needs to be its own thing. And,
Mhm.
Congress needs to have some power over it, essentially. You can debate whether or not that's a good
Yeah.
way of doing it, but that's the reasoning. The other ones are territories. These are allegedly semi less populated areas such as Puerto Rico, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and I think there's a few others, but those are the big ones.
So basically, they would kind of just get shafted in terms of political representation.
Yeah, there's some trades off. You can have we could have an hour long discussion about how the Puerto Ricans feel about this, but I won't speak to it as much because we gotta move on. But yeah, so my issues with corporate person representation in a Senate. Yeah, I have big questions about what the population of the Trade Federation is. Are you a citizen? Are you considered a citizen of the Trade Federation if you work for it? Can you get fired? What happens when you get fired? Do you lose your statehood? Do you get transferred into the a different demographic? Immigration is a whole other thing that we could be talking about with the Senate, and it has been brought up in Star Wars, but it's a whole another big thing. But that's an issue. I think I think there's definitely questions about how populated the Trade Federation is, because the Trade Federation's every location in Star Wars has their own little militia. The Republic didn't have a standing army until the Clone Wars, and everyone just had their own little militia. And the Trade Federation's militia was the droid army. So yeah, you just have this instead of every other place, which is drawing their militia from their population, there's the Trade Federation, which is making a bunch of droids for their militia. And maybe they're doing that because they're rich and they can afford it, but are they doing it because there's maybe 30,000 people in the Trade Federation and this is just what they need? That's an issue. There's also is the Techno Union a democratic institution? Do you vote for the CEO of the Techno Union? Who votes for the CEO of the Techno Union?
I'm sorry, I just have to put this out into the universe. I'd love to see this actually implemented into the states.
Yeah.
solely for the purpose of Jeff Bezos's Amazon declaring war on Elon Musk's Tesla.
Yeah, no.
Which is actually kind of funny because I think a couple of years ago I saw a post somewhere out there that was stating that Jeff Bezos was trying to start a workhouse program within the United States, which basically means that Amazon will pay for your rent and all of your housing necessities, but you'd work off essentially the debt that you have to owe them every month from your wages that you made up by that Amazon. And it's for some stuff, it's a wonderful idea, and I think he knows that it's a good idea. But besides that, when it gets too far on the other end, then it starts becoming a bad idea. For example, I can go into my work and grab lunch. They have a debit machine, but I brought it up. I'm like, why don't they do charge cards for staff so that, say I want to put $100 onto a charge card for my lunches, go in every day and just tap my charge card, and it'll come off my check or whatever. That. That is a completely reasonable use of, or they control your wages and the cost of goods and start outpricing all of the prices of goods because they control both. Really bad idea, and I don't know if there's any form of implications here that this is a bad idea, but I'm assuming it's not a good idea. Amazon being in charge of Amazon as a lobbying level would be absolutely gross. So, well, even if you look at Trump right now, people were all up in arms earlier on in his presidency, like his initial campaign, like, oh, he's a millionaire that's giving up all the money he can to be a president. How humble of him. And then, like, 3 years later, it turns out he's made $160 million dealings as the president of the United States of America, like in underhanded business deals. Like, you really got to start to question. And then everybody's all, or I shouldn't say everybody, the alt-right is really up in arms about, like, Hunter Biden's, like, dealings that he was doing as not the president of the United States of America. And they're like, well, Joe Biden must have known. And then the evidence actually comes out and it's like, hey, Dad, do you want a part or a cut of this? And Joe Biden said no to it. Like, he understands that he should not, as the president of the United States of America, be using his political position to be able to profit off of it, essentially. So, and I guess that really does bring me to my position on the whole political spectrum is we need to take money out of politics. You know, we need to stop giving copious amounts of money to public servants and make up. For example, right now, it's a wonderful example. Why don't we start paying our politicians what we pay our teachers, which is very topical considering Tuesday the teacher union just went on strike and it's continuing, I think, into, it was a one-day strike and there's going to be a couple more here coming up. Let's just start paying our politicians the same money they pay the teachers in Canada and see how many more politicians want to be politicians anymore. I think I've brought this up before. Scott Moe is currently paid $256,000 a year. The average teacher salary is anywhere between maybe 70 or 80, and that's being very generous. First year teachers would be. I think when I was looking up statistics, Canadian teachers go out, they get their degree, and most of them quit within the first 5 years of becoming a teacher, or a good portion of them quit between that. So that's my rant for the.
Hi. Okay, so yeah, just editing Kyle here. We had some issues. I lost the last 10 minutes of my audio, which is always fun. So yeah, these were our like points. Like these were the things we were bringing up as these are flaws with the system as presented in Star Wars. Not necessarily to point out that like this makes the setting unrealistic. I don't really think it does. It's completely understandable this place works differently than our normal system as we know it, but these are just our notes about, okay, here's the problems with this. And an important lesson to note is that these problems don't necessarily mean that this can't function. Like I think there's a lot of points where people do civilizations that are like too flawed to possibly exist, and these bring up flaws with the political system, which I think the lesson we want to take away, I want people to take away from this, is that these real government is not always sensical. Like it's not that it's things work because we make them work to an extent. If you believe in a system, you will keep it up and running as much as you need to, and it doesn't, to an extent, matter that there are flaws. I mean, those flaws are going to cause drains, but those flaws can be drains on the system for centuries. Like, Star Wars obviously has a little bit of a silly time scale with, like, oh, the Old Republic lasted like 25,000 years, which is a little fanciful. But, I mean, ancient Egypt wasn't necessarily the nicest place, and it lasted several thousands of years. The Roman Republic and the Roman Empire had a lot of flaws on either side of that divide, and those lasted for about 500 years apiece, and longer if you consider the Eastern Roman Empire. So I think this is we can take some lessons from that, and like this is why this is sort of fun to discuss. Yeah, at the end of the day, we're taking this fictional subject and trying to use it to do a little bit of education about like how real things work and like talk about like a fun subject, and oh, this is a fun way to engage people with something real, and sometimes do what science fiction is best at, and have us examine things about our own world through a lens of a world that's a little bit different sometimes, to explore some things. And what's it? Yeah, this was basically the end of what we had to say anyway. I don't think there's many more points that we had. I think we were basically touching on my last thing. I think we'll do like more of an. We might even do a full episode on the concept of corporate nationhood later in the later in our podcast lifespan. So yeah, we're gonna do. Yeah, this is one of the ideas of the sort of episode we're gonna be doing. This sort of like vague comparative exploring of a topic. Next time you're gonna get a more of a sample of some of the other shorter stuff we're gonna do. We're gonna take a look at Scrooge McDuck and ask the question: is he a good billionaire? Which we'll explain a little bit more when we do that episode. So we'll have a little bit of fun with that. Just as a little bit of a post is where you can find us other places. You can find me at Lord Brokenshire at bluesky.social. And you can find Cody at, I'll put down his audio where he says what he needs.
I don't use any social medias. I currently do occasionally stream to Twitch, but I'm kind of in the period where I'm currently having an identity crisis on what I want to be known as on Twitch. So I'll get back to that later on. Besides that, I really don't have social media. You can follow our other podcast at Kyle and Cody's called CinemaCast. That's really all we got to plug. We can be found on YouTube or pretty much anywhere you get your other podcasts. So,
and yeah, we'll see you soon with our second little episode.